In the previous video, we looked at the issue of errors that have come to exist within the prevalent versions of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. This video aims to deal with two primary questions that arose in the minds of viewers. First, how we ended up with the problem, and second, why it came into being. This video will thus provide three distinct, separate, and alternative explanations for the problem. The first explanation, and arguably this is the most basic, is that the existence of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is the result of what we call duplication errors that are caused by human error. All the early beads were produced by hand copying. This process is, of course, a definite source of errors. Additionally, a great portion of the hand copying was undertaken by the clergy, Nirmalas in particular, who were trained in Hindi and not in Punjabi. So the propensity of errors was multiplied. When the practice of hand copying was replaced by the process of printing, the process of printing, typesetting, and proofreading all became subject to human error, especially if these critical processes were neglected, done unprofessionally, overlooked, or ignored altogether. After all of these critical processes were overseen by humans. A sub-explanation of the human error theory is technical errors. This was especially so in the typeset printing era. Individual letters had to be picked up and arranged in reverse to form one page. Letters frequently dropped out, were wrongly placed, or the printers simply ran short of them, resulting in errors. The second explanation is what we can term as errors resulting from the evolution in the process of Gurbani presentation. We can talk about two types of evolutionary processes here. The first is the change from the continuous style to the separated style, or what we say in Punjabi, Jodvi to Padshad. The process of separating words can and does result in errors. The second evolutionary process had to do with the printing technology itself. The printing of beads had evolved from the stone press to typeset and then to plate printing. So each time this change happened, old errors got preserved and new ones got added on. The third explanation for the existence of errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji has to do with the advent of clergyism in Sikhi. There are three ways in which we can look at how the clergy class came into being within Sikhi. The first is that it was a natural process. If we look at all the other religions around us, the existence of the clergy as a central force is a natural process. The second way to look at the advent of clergyism in Sikhi is that it was the result of evolution within the practice of Sikhi, in particular, institutionalized or organized Sikhi. The growth of Sikhism in terms of numbers, the expansion of its institutions, particularly Gurdwaras, its expanding geographical reach and spread of influence grew to a point where the clergy class became necessary and thus easily established itself. The third possibility is that it was a purposive process, that the clergy was created to serve certain ends, certain goals, and certain purposes. But the third possibility, a purpose-filled one, is particularly relevant to the Sikhi of Guru Nanak, as we shall see shortly. To get deeper insights into the issue of clergyism in Sikhi, let's begin with attempting to understand the characteristics of the clergy class. In terms of definition, the clergy consists of a class of people authorized to do religious rituals. They are a body of people who earn their living in the conduct of religious rites. Looking at it from the perspective of the clergy class, we can say, in a nutshell, what the primary objective of the clergy class is. From the narrowest of perspectives, the objective is to earn a living. But from the broader perspective, it's about exerting influence and control over the flock. It's about exercising power and sway over the followers of the religion. And the primary method to achieve that objective is by way of control of the religious narrative. The clergy sets the narrative and determines the narrative. And the primary method of controlling the religious narrative is to exercise control of and over the religious text. The best way, obviously, would be for the clergy to write the entire religious text themselves, which is the case of the Bible. The Bible was put together by the Catholic Church, the epicenter of their clergy. The next best way is to interpret the religious text in ways that best serves the clergy interests, purposes, and objectives. The other way is for the clergy to create their own body of parallel narratives and have these parallel narratives be the subject matter of supportive or secondary religious texts. So, what we need to keep in mind is that there is always a contradiction between the original religious narrative, the one that is espoused by the founding fathers or prophets, if you like, and the narrative which is created by the clergy. This contradiction between the two narratives arises because the objectives of the founders and the objectives of the clergy class are in contradiction. We have this Shabad of Bhagta Namdev within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji on page 874, which illustrates this contradiction. Bilawal Gond, Aaj namme Bithal dekhiya murkh ko samjhao re rahao. Meaning, now that Namdev has obtained realization of the Creator within, Aaj namme Bithal dekhiya, I have come to be enlightened about the unenlightened. Murkh ko samjhao re. पांडे तुमरी गायत्री लोदे का खेत खाती थी. O clergy, your Gayatri mantra, Tomari Gayatri, note the use of the word your Gayatri. There is a narrative of the Gayatri mantra in the original Sanatan texts, and there is a Gayatri of the clergy creation. The narrative of the clergy is Lode ka khet khati thi. That Gayatri was a cow that went to graze a farmer's field. The clergy narrative continues. Lekar thenga thagari tori langat jati thi. Meaning, Gayatri the cow was attacked by the farmer and came out limping on 3 legs. Then Namdev says, Pande Tomra Mahadev. So there is a Mahadev or a Shivji of the original texts, and there is another Shivji of the clergy narrative, Tomra Mahadev. The clergy version of Shivji is one who was invited for lunch in a disciple's house, Modi ke kar khana paka, and the one who killed a child of the host because the food was not up to the mark. Waka ladka marya tha. And Namdev continues, Pande Tomara Ramchandra सो भी आवत देखा था. Again, there is a Ramchandar of the original text and the one created by the clergy. Then Namdev says, Hindu Anna Turku Kana, meaning, O clergy, you have caused your flock to become short-sighted, if not totally blind. And then Namdev says, Doha te gyani syana, meaning, what is needed by both flocks is enlightenment. The message is that while original religious narratives intend to enlighten its followers, the clergy concocted narratives bring about unenlightenment. Hindu Anna Turku Kana. The next verse is Hindu Puja Dehora Musalman Masjid, meaning, through your narratives, O clergy, you have caused people to worship you, worship the idols that you created, and worship the gods that you created in the houses of worship that you control. In the final verse, Namdev says, Nambe sei sevya ja dehora na masjid, meaning, Namdev serves to realize the one who does not reside in your places of worship, O clergy. So, what is the message of the Shabad? First, we need to know what the message is not. This Shabad is not a critique of Gayatri, not a critique of Shivji or of Ramchandra. It is not a critique of the original belief systems that are mentioned. But if you took this Shabad to our clergy, the clergy in your local Gurdwara, with very few exceptions, this is what most of them will say, that this Shabad is indeed a critique of the beliefs of other religions to prove that our religion is superior. Now, that's not the message of the Shabda Pyareo. That's our clergy's interpretation, or misinterpretation rather, that the other religion is critiqued and the one that I, meaning me as the clergy, the one that I am preaching is praised. So the question is, why did Guru Nanak take this Shabad from Bhagat Namdev? Why did Guru Arjan include it in the Pothi Sahib? Why did Guru Gobind Singh keep it in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji? The reason is that it lays down a critical, foundational and basic principle. It exposes the clergy's role in spiritual distortion and corruption. The message is to expose the decadent role of the clergy and to prevent us Sikhs from falling prey into the rot in spirituality that the clergy inflicts upon the original belief systems, all in the name of serving his own interests and that of his clergy class. Now let's examine the position of clergy in Guru Nanak's Sikhi. We know from reading Gurbani that Guru Nanak made a profound observation of the clergy that existed in the 15th century through his travels far and wide. The following verses contain his observations. Tanasri Mahalla Pehla, Qadi Kood Bol Mal Khaye. The Qadi, meaning Muslim clergy, was corrupt. Bamban Nave Jia Kai, the Brahmin, Sanatan clergy, was unscrupulous, and the yogi was simply blind. Yogi Jogtana Jane And. The conclusion is in the final verse, Tine Ujade Ka Band, meaning all three were the root cause of the spiritual decay. All three were the primary cause of the spiritual devastation, Ujada, and all three were the foundational cause of the spiritual vacuum, the spiritual emptiness, and the spiritual hollowness that had come to fill the hearts of human beings. So this is Guru Nanak's conclusion pertaining to the clergy. They, meaning the clergy, are the root cause of spiritual death and decay, tine ujade ka band. In a nutshell then, the position of clergy within Sikhi is that within the spirituality of Guru Nanak, this class is rejected. In other words, the spirituality of Guru Nanak puts the clergy class outside of its parameters. Here is a verse of Bhagat Kabir Ji that establishes this principle. It is found on page 1559 of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Hamra chagra raha na kohu, Pandit Mulla chhade do rahao. Meaning, all my inner spiritual conflicts have come to be resolved to the extent that none remain whatsoever. Hamra chagra raha na ko. How so? Pandit Mulla chhade do. I have discarded the clergy from within my spiritual journey. Bhagat Kabir Ji goes on into specifics on what he actually did while traversing his journey of spirituality. He says, all that the clergy have provided, all that they have said, offered and pronounced, Pandit Mulla jo likh diya, I have discarded it all, chhad chale. I have accepted none of it. I acknowledge no part of it. Hum kachu na liya. What I have provided, Pyareo, in the form of verses above, is merely a sprinkling of the critique against the clergy class that is contained within Gurbani. There is a whole body of such critique in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Nevertheless, and despite it all, a clergy class has come to exist within Sikhi. Sikhi has, for the most part, come to adopt a clergy class. A clergy that over time became pervasive, powerful, and one with an extensive reach, one that reaches deep into the foundations of Sikhi and into the hearts and minds of Sikhs. Historically, this advent can be traced to the post-Guru period, in particular the period after the defeat, capture and execution of Banda Singh Bahadur in 1716. This is when the Udasis took control of major Sikh Gurdwaras for some 60 years, followed by the Nirmalas for another 150 years. So the Udasi Sadhus and Nirmala Mahants became the foundation of Sikh clergy as it began to take shape. These two groups have over the past 3 centuries evolved into our present day clergy, Dera Sons, Taksali Babas, and those Granthis, Ragis, Pracharaks, Kathakars, Tadis, etc., who are schooled in the Dera and Taksali institutions. While establishing itself, the biggest concern or worry for the Sikh clergy was that he, his class, and his position was soundly rejected within the Sikhi of Guru Nanak. His concern was that Gurbani had rejected his class in its entirety. His worry was that Guru Nanak had removed him from the parameters of Sikhi spirituality. Most of all, his deepest worry was that his narrative was soundly contradicted by the narrative that is within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. This contradiction posed a major problem to our clergy. So, it was only natural that if the Sikh clergy wanted to survive, thrive and prosper, he had to bring the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji in line with his narrative, with the clergy's narrative. His method was to corrupt, distort and adulterate the messages of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji to the extent possible. What choice did our clergy have, given the deep contradictions between his own self-serving narratives, his unbelievable sakhis, his miraculous tales, and the divine narrative that was within Gurbani? he did not have the luxury that the Catholic clergy had of writing out the whole text himself and according to his own needs, but he had other instruments in his toolbox. So let's revert to explanation 3 for the issue under discussion, namely the advent of clergyism into Sikhi, and see how it progressed to bring us to the situation we are in, numerous errors within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. For this, we will need to first look at how the clergy worked to achieve its goals. We need to look at how he took care of his deep worry that he, his class and his position were rejected within the Sikhi of Guru Nanak. We will need to look at how he found a remedy to the truth that his narrative was contradicted by the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So to find a permanent solution to his concerns, the clergy had to focus his energies on the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji and on everything surrounding the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, concerning the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and everything that had to do with the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. In the grand scheme of things, the clergy achieved this through a 7-step process. The first step was the elimination of the one individual who had put the Pothi Sahib together, who had created the text that would become the foundational text of Sikh spirituality, and the one who was responsible for it all, Guru Arjan Patsha Ji. We know from historical records, particularly from the personal diary of Emperor Jahangir, the Tauzake Jahangiri, that the order of execution came from him. But the clergy at that time, particularly the Brahmin, played a major role in creating the pretext for the execution of Guru Arjan Ji. The clergy constructed its pretext around the Pothi Sahib because that was the clergy's main concern. So they fed Jahangir a concocted and dangerous allegation that the Pothi Sahib contained writings that were blasphemous to Islam, the religion of Jahangir's empire, sacrilegious to Hinduism, the religion of the masses, and was hence a threat to the position of Jahangir himself. The truth of the matter, of course, was that the Pothi Sahib was a threat to no one but the clergy. The fanatical and narrow-minded Jahangir, however, saw benefit in the clergy maneuverings, not only because the clergy gave him the pretext he was looking for, but because his own objectives of eliminating Guru Arjan coincided with the objectives of the clergy. Historian Principal Satbir Singh writes in his book Sada Itihas, or Our History, Part 1, on page 182, that Jahangir, after examining the Pothi Sahib and after finding nothing wrong in its compositions, ordered that compositions of his choice be added. We know that the Guru refused on grounds of wanting to maintain the sacrosanctity of Gurbani, and that he had to pay for this with his life. But the point that gets established is that the clergy of the day had fed Jahangir messages that laid false aspersions on the Pothi Sahib. It is clear, therefore, that the target was Pothi Sahib and its author. It was akin to killing two birds with one stone as far as the clergy of the day were concerned. Now, even though the clergy of the day played a pivotal and central role in the execution of Guru Arjan Ji, it was critical to keep his hand hidden. Sikh clergy has achieved this objective through the creation of fake narratives pertaining to the execution of the fifth Guru to obfuscate the real reasons. These are the primary texts, or what we call classical Sikh texts, all written by Nirmalas, the forefathers of our clergy, that contain the narrative of Guru Arjan's martyrdom. Bansavali Nama, Mehma Prakash, the prose version, Mehma Prakash, the poetic form, Sikha di Bhaktamal, Gurbilas Padshai Shevi, Suraj Prakash, Panth Prakash in poetic form, and Tawarik Guru Khalsa in prose form. In describing the torture and execution of Guru Arjan, all of these 8 texts have provided reasons that are trivial, baseless or merely coincidental, such as the role of Chandu and Khusro, a failed marriage proposal, and unpaid taxes. All of these reasons are primarily aimed at the following 3 things. 1. Hiding the role of the clergy in the execution. 2. Concealing the fact that the execution had to do with the Pothi Sahib, the biggest threat to the clergy. And 3. Deflecting the blame to others, Chandu and Khusro in particular. So successful has been the narrative of the clergy in these 8 texts that the Sikh world has reduced the greatest martyrdom in the history of the spiritual world to the most trivial event of distributing sweet water called Shabil. So that Pyareo was the first step, the elimination of the one who had created the Pothi Sahib, Guru Arjan Patsha Ji. We need to keep in mind that while the target is Guru Arjan, it is the Pothi Sahib that irked the clergy the most. So that brings us to step number 2, which is to create negative narratives about the history relating to the Pothi Sahib. The whole idea is to reduce the sacrosanctity of Pothi Sahib, to bring down its exalted position, to relegate it to a position that is lower than what it deserves, to trivialize it. So in this regard, our clergy writers created fake stories of how the Pothi Sahib came into being. Let me give you the real narrative first, the non-clergy version, and this can be found in the writings of historians such as Professor Sahib Singh in his book Aad Beed Bare, Professor Pyara Singh Padam in Sri Guru Granth Sahib Prakash, Professor Harpajan Singh in Gurbani Sampadan Nirnay, and Principal Satbir Singh in Sada Itihas. Note that all of these writings are the result of modern research and produced in the past 50 years or so. And they are a reaction to the distorted accounts that are found within the so-called clergy-created classical texts. The real narrative, according to this modern research, is that Guru Nanak wrote his own Bani in his own Pothi. He also collected all the Bhakt Bani that is found within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. When the Guruship passed to Guru Angad, he handed over his Pothi to the second Guru, who added his own compositions and passed it all to the third Guru Amar Das Ji. This continued till the Bani of the first 4 Gurus and the Bhagat's Bani reached Guru Arjan, who compiled it all, added his own and that of the Bhatts into Pothi Sahib. In essence then, Pyareo, the motive for the Pothi Sahib was one that originated exclusively with Guru Arjan Patsha. The need to create Pothi Sahib was a conscious and purposive decision of the 5th Guru himself. But if we look at the primary clergy texts, or what we call classical Sikh texts, all written by Nirmala, such as Kesar Singh Chibbar's Bansavali Nama, Baba Kirpal Singh's Mehma Prakash, Baba Swarup Das Palla's Mehma Prakash, Nirmala's Suraj Singh's Sikha di Bhaktamal, Nirmala's Gurmukh Singh and Darbara Singh's Gurbilas Padshai Chemi, Nirmala Kavi Santokh Singh's Gurpratap Suraj Prakash, and Nirmala Gyani Gyan Singh's Panth Prakash and Tawarik Guru Khalsa if we look at all these primary clergy texts, the narrative of how and why the Pothi Sahib came into existence is starkly different. The idea being propagated in these clergy texts is that the Pothi Sahib was not Guru Arjan's own initiative. It was written in response to what Sodhi Meherwan, son of Prithvi Chand, had done. The other idea that is contained within this clergy texts is that Pothi Sahib was not the fulfillment of Guru Nanak's intent to pass down Bani in written form to us Sikhs. The narrative in this text is that Guru Arjan compiled the Pothi Sahib only after Meherwan beat Guruji to it, and because Meherwan's Granth contained fake compositions under the name of Nanak, another Granth, namely the Pothi Sahib, had to be compiled so that Meherwan's Granth could be cleaned up. Now, if we did some fact checking, this is what we find. The Pothi Sahib project started in 1603. Meherwan was born in 1585. Now, this means Meherwan was a mere 18 years of age when he completed an entire Granth under the name of Nanak. Now, how could this be? This is the other narrative that is found within our clergy-created classical literature, that the Bani of the first four Gurus was with Baba Mohan, the estranged son of Guru Amar Das. Guru Arjan sent Bhai Gurdas according to the narrative of this clergy text, and then he sent Baba Buddhaji to reclaim them. When Mohan refused to hand over the Pothis, the Bani, Guru went himself. When Baba Mohan still refused, Guru Arjan sang this Shabad in praise of Mohan. Mohan, tere uche mandar mahal apara. O Mohan, you have a wonderful house and an exalted position. Mohan tere sohan dwar jio sant dharmsala. O Mohan, your doorstep leads to the abode of God. Hearing such praise, Mohan came down and handed over the Pothis to Guru Arjan. Again, if we did some fact checking, we have to ask the following questions. How is it that four Gurus wrote their Bani and handed it over to Mohan? Would Guru Arjan compose a Shabad just to praise Mohan? Mohan is used some 97 times in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji by other Gurus, Guru Nanak and Guru Ramdas. They were surely not referring to Mohan, the estranged son of Guru Amar Das Ji. Here are some more facts to consider. The meaning of the word Mohan in the Shabad refers to the creator. All the 8 classical texts claim the Pothis reached Guru Arjan, but none of them talk about these Pothis going back to Mohan. Yet the claim is that these Mohan Pothis exist today and that they are in 2 volumes. More fact-checking reveals that there is a pauri in War 26 of Bhai Gurdas Ji where he talks about the children of our Gurus, the children who rebelled and who worked against the Gurus. In other words, those who opposed our Gurus. Bal Jati hai Sri Chand Babana Deora Banaya. Sri Chand set up his own religion. Lakshmi Dasson Dharm Chand Pota Hoye ke aap ganaya. Lakshmi Das set out to set up his own sect. When Bhai Gurdas Ji comes to Mohan, the one who had all the Bani of the 4 Gurus according to our clergy texts, Bhai Gurdas says, Mohana Kamala Hoya Chabara Mohri Manaya. He describes Mohan as Kamala, meaning deranged, out of his mind. Mohri, his brother, collaborated with him, put him on a pedestal. So the question is, how did a Kamala get the Pothis? How did a Kamala get mentioned or get praised in a Shabad within Gurbani? Now the final verse of Bhai Gurdas Ji is enlightening indeed. He says, Chandan Vas na Vas Bohaya, meaning These were people, in other words, these children of the Gurus, these were people who never got the fragrance of Bani. So how could Mohan have been in possession of the pothis? The narrative is as fake as the cow jumping over the moon and the spoon running away with the fiddle. But it's there as a historical fact in the clergy-created classical Sikh literature, or rather a fiction disguised as a historical fact. If we accept that our Gurus wrote their Bani and handed it to Mohan in the form of two pothis, then let's look at just the opening verse in volume 1 of these Baba Mohan pothis. It reads, Ek Oankar Sat Guru Prasad. Now this is not how the opening verse begins in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Then the Baba Mohan pothi says Satchanam. The word in Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is Satnam. Then the pothi says Kartar. The correct phrase is Karta Purakh. Then Nirpau, which is perhaps the only correct word in the entire opening verse. Then the pothi uses the word Nirikar. We don't have this word Nirikar in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji as our opening verse. If any of our four Gurus wrote this and handed it to Baba Mohan, how could they have made so many errors? And this is just the opening verse. Obviously, these pothis are the creation of persons other than our Gurus. And Guru Arjan Ji had neither the need nor the interest in them while creating the Pothi Sahib. The reality was that they did not exist then, not with Mohan and not with anyone else. These so-called Baba Mohan pothis were brought into existence probably and most likely after the original Pothi Sahib was destructed. Let's revert to explanation 3 for the issue under discussion, namely the advent of clergyism into Sikhi, and see how it progressed through 7 steps to bring us to the situation we are in pertaining to the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. As mentioned above, the first step was the elimination of the one who had created the Pothi Sahib, Guru Arjan Ji. And the second step was to create within the classical literature negative narratives about the history relating to the Pothi Sahib. Step 3 involved getting rid of the original text and creating a replacement text. We know that the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji had its roots in 3 original sources: the Pothi Sahib or the Pai Gurdas Wali Bead, the Pai Banno Wali Bead, which was the first authorized copy of Pothi Sahib, authorized by none other than Guru Arjan Ji himself, and the Damdami Bead, which was a re-edited and recompiled version of the Pothi Sahib. None of the 3 exist today in their original form, not a single one. One authoritative text on the old beads of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is written by Udasi Swami Haranam Das. His book is titled Puratan Beeda Te Vichar. Volume 1 came out in 1969 and Volume 2 in 1972. This is what he writes on page 90. ਖੋਜ ਕੀਤਿਆਂ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਲਿਖਵਾਈ ਅਤੇ ਨਾ ਹੀ ਗੁਰਤਾ ਵਾਲੀ ਬੀੜ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ, ਬਲਕਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਵੇਲੇ ਦੀ ਬੀੜ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਦੀ. Translation: Upon research, one cannot find any bead that was caused to be written by Guru Gobind Singh or the one that was given Gurgaddi. In fact, one cannot find any bead that was written during the era of Guru Arjan. There are, of course, claims of all sorts that this or that bead is indeed one of the original. This is where the creation of replacement texts come into play. These are the 3 primary replacement texts that exist within the Sikh world today. First, the Baba Mohan Pothis in 2 volumes. Second, 3 versions of the Pai Banno bead and third, the Kartarpuri bead. All of these replacement texts come with claims of authenticity and originality. For instance, the Sodhi family at Kartarpur, the owners of the Kartarpuri bead, issued a statement through one Amarjit Singh Sodhi that the Kartarpuri bead in their possession was indeed the Bhai Gurdas Wali bead. The three people who are in possession of three versions of Bhai Banno bead all claim that their copy is the original Bhai Banno Wali bead. Those who have examined these beads have pointed towards countless facts that expose the lie of all these claims. This is a list of experts who have studied these replacement texts. G.B. Singh in Prachin Bidambare, Bhai Rantir Singh in Gurshabd Vigas, Professor Preetam Singh Patiala in his essay in the Journal of Sikh Studies, Gyani Rajinder Singh in Bhai Banno Darpan and Khade Wali bead, and Professor Pyar Singh in Gatha Sri Ad Granth. One fact that is exposed by these researchers is the existence of what we call faltu rachanas, unnecessary or adulterated compositions that are contained within these beads. These are the faltu rachanas in Bhai Banno Wali bead that is kept by the descendants of Bhai Banno at Mangat in Gujarat. Hakikat Ra Muqam Raje Shebnav ki Chit Dar Lakh Muhammada Thaye Atish Ath Khak Ratanmala Rag Ramkali Ragmala Chalittar Jyoti Jyot Samavan ke and Syahi ki Bidhi. If indeed this was an authorized copy of Pothi Sahib, how did these faltu rachanas get included? In January of 1918, Bhai Singh Nabha, the author of Sikh Encyclopedia, published a letter in Panth Sevak newspaper wherein he narrated his experience of having examined the Kartarpuri bead. In that letter, he mentioned that the Kartarpuri bead contained the following faltu rachanas. Hakikat Ra Muqam Rajeshev Navki Ratanmala Rag Ramkali Ragmala Chalittar Jyoti Jyot Samavan ke Niranjan Rai Potra Tirmal, the Mahima or praises of Niranjan Rai, the grandson of Tirmal. Now, Tirmal is of course the ancestor family of the Sodhis who have this bead as their personal property and claim that this bead is the one that is written by Bhai Gurdas himself. How could Bhai Gurdas have written about this so-called Niranjan Rai, someone who was not even born when Pothi Sahib was composed? So that was step 3 in the process of the advent of clergyism in Sikhi. Get rid of the original texts. And they got rid of all 3 original texts and then create a replacement text which is distorted. The Kartarpuri bead, the 3 Bhai Banno Wali beads and the Baba Mohan Pothis all fall in this category of replacement texts. The next step is the building of authenticity and legitimacy for the distorted text, that is the replacement text. In other words, the building of authenticity and legitimacy for the Kartarpuri bead, the 3 Bhai Banno Wali beads and the Baba Mohan Pothis. One of the claims that are made within all the beads that are around, whether it's the Kartarpuri bead or the so-called Bhai Banno Wali bead, is the presence of signatures of our Gurus. We may as well call this the great signature hoax, because that is what it really is. The claim is that their beads contain the signature of Guru Arjan in the form of opening verse in the Guru's own handwriting. The claim is that this is the handwriting of Guru Arjan Ji in the Bhai Banno Wali bead. This one is claimed to be Guru Arjan's handwriting in the Kartarpuri bead. If one took a cursory look, it will be clear that both handwritings are very different indeed. The spellings of the word Porakh Nirpao, Nirvair, Ajuni, and Gurprasad in both signatures are different. The Onkards are all missing in the Kartarpuri signature version. In the Pai Banno Wali bead, the word Ajuni is spelled as Ajini. How could the Guru have made such an error? In the Banno Wali bead, there is an additional word Sat before Guru Prasad. The word Guru Prasad is spelled differently in both signatures. Within the Pai Banno Wali bead, it is written with an Onkar, and in the Kartarpuri bead with a Sihari. The visible conclusion is that the claim that these are indeed signatures of Guru Arjan Pacha, or any Guru for that matter, is doubtful, dubious, and definitely unreliable. Now, signatures on the beads are a vital component. When Guru Arjan Pacha sat down to compose the Pothi Sahib, he would have written the opening verse in his own handwriting and then told Bhai Gurdas to do the rest in his writing. This means that the signature of Guru Arjan would have to be on the same page on page 1. But this is not the case with the signatures in the Pai Banno and the Kartarpuri beads. This is what Professor Pyar Singh says in his book Gatha Sri Ad Granth on page 457. ਪਾਵਨ ਬੀੜ ਦੀ ਤਿਆਰੀ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਆਰੰਭਣ ਲਈ ਸਤਿਗੁਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਰ ਕਮਲਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਲਿਖਵਾਉਣਾ ਬੜਾ ਵਾਜਬੀ ਕਦਮ ਸੀ। ਆਦ ਬੀੜ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਅਵਸ਼ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਕਾਗਜ਼ ਤੇ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਫਰੇਮ ਵਾਂਗ ਜੜਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ। Translation: At the start of the holy bead, Pothi Sahib, having Sadguru Ji write out the Mool Mantar in his own hand would have been a required task. It would certainly have been the case in the Aad bead, Bhai Gurdas Wali bead, but here in the Kartarpuri bead, it is written on a separate piece of paper with a frame around it and added to the bead. So what this means is that these so-called signatures on these beads are not on the pages within the main text. They are on a different page, and that page is added to the bead and framed in. This is the signature of Guru Hargobind Pacha as claimed in the Kartarpuri bead on page 540. This one is the signature of Guru Hargobind Ji in the Pai Banno Wali bead. As you can see, they are starkly different. The construction of the letters, the ek, the ura, the sassa, tatta, nanna and mamma of Satnam are different enough to have been written by two different persons. Again, Professor Pyar Singh in his book says that both of these signatures are not in the text. They are on separate pieces of paper that are added on to the text. So it's clear that this signature thing is no more than an attempt to provide authenticity and legitimacy for the distorted replacement text. The signatures are fake, and their insertion into the beads is an act of corruption. The other way that has been used to provide authenticity and legitimacy for the corrupted and distorted replacement texts is the fakery of the year of the bead. This is the index page of the Pai Banno Wali bead. The first line on the left says Suchi Pattar Pothi ka tatha tatkara raga ka. Translated, it means information page of the Pothi and the contents page of the rags. The second line tells us what is on page 33, the green circle. The third line provides the information pertaining to when this Pothi was written. Notice that the year has been tampered with, altered. The original year of 1699 has been altered to make it 1659. So 40 years are taken off. This Pothi is made 40 years older by just breaking the figure 9 and changing it to 5. How does one trust the authenticity and legitimacy of such a text? So that's the second way to build authenticity and legitimacy for the replacement text, by faking the year of its creation. The third way is to get the stamp of approval from the authority, the government of the day. We know that governments are not really equipped to provide such authority, but it did not stop our clergy from getting the government to do so. The owners of Kartarpuri bead told a tall tale to Maharaja Ranjit Singh about this bead being the original Pothi Sahib, and he swallowed their story hook, line and sinker and ordered a jagir, a royal stipend of sorts. The owners of Kartarpuri bead get 86 rupees per day, rupees 600 for every Amavas and Sangrant, that's twice a month, and one horse per year. Maharaja Narinder Singh Patiala took the bead to his palace and kept it there for 3 years, paying them rupees 51 per day for those 3 years. The fact that that's lots of money in the 1800s is one thing. The more important thing is that the government of the day agrees that the Kartarpuri bead is the real Pothi Sahib. Otherwise, why pay the royal stipend? So what we have seen so far are the 4 steps. The first was the elimination of the one who created Pothi Sahib, Guru Arjan Ji. The second was to create within the classical literature negative narratives about the history relating to the Pothi Sahib. And the third was to rid the original text and create a replacement text. The fourth was to build authenticity and legitimacy for the corrupted and distorted text. The fifth step is to establish the replacement text as the benchmark, the rightful benchmark, the correct benchmark. This is done in 3 basic ways. The first is by way of a public claim. Amarjit Singh Sodhi, the owner of Kartarpuri bead and a descendant of the Irmal, declared openly that the Kartarpuri bead in his possession was the exact one that was narrated by Guru Arjan and in the handwriting of Bhai Gurdas. The second way is by way of narrative. For instance, Nirmala Gyani Gyan Singh claims in Tawarikh Raj Khalsa that Baba Deep Singh used the Kartarpuri bead as the benchmark for the Damtabi bead. In the early 1900s, Nirmala's Bhai Veer Singh, Bhai Jodh Singh and Gyani Mahasingh, all belonging to the Chief Khalsa Diwan, conducted a long battle in their newspaper Khalsa Samachar to establish the fact that the Kartarpuri bead was indeed the Bhai Gurdas Wali bead. When scholars such as Bhai Khan Singh Nabha, the writer of Mahan Kosh, took on them and pointed out that the Kartarpuri bead was written by 6 persons because it has 6 different handwritings, the reply from the Chief Khalsa Diwan Nirmala group was most ridiculous. Bhai Jodh Singh writes in his book Kartarpuri Bead Their Darshan, while acknowledging that the handwritings of certain portions were indeed by different writers, that one of the handwritings was possibly of Guru Arjan Ji. He doesn't quite tell us how he figured that out. The third way to establish the replacement text as the benchmark, the rightful benchmark, the correct benchmark, is by way of institutional recognition. By getting primary and leading Sikh institutions to accept the replacement text as the benchmark. The SGPC, under the pressure of the Sikh clergy, did exactly that in 1951 when it recognized the Kartarpuri bead, complete with all suspicions, questions and doubts surrounding it, as the benchmark for the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. To show you how the 1951 SGPC committee under Bhai Jodh Singh of Chief Khalsa Diwan bent backwards to accept the Kartarpuri bead as the benchmark, despite the mountain load of evidence of it being a corrupted and distorted clergy replacement text. Here is an excerpt from a book by Gyani Dutt Singh titled Mundavani. Pandit Kartar Singh is asking, ਕੀ ਕੋਈ ਉਹ ਬੀੜ ਵੀ ਆਧਾਰ ਬਣ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਨੌਵੇਂ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਬਾਣੀ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ? ਸੋ ਪੁਰਖ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰੀ ਬੀੜ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਚਲਿਤ ਬੀੜ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੱਢਿਆ ਜਾਵੇਗਾ। ਜੋ ਬੀੜ ਭਾਵ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਰ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੈ ਭਾਵ 7 ਫਾਲਤੂ ਰਚਨਾਵਾਂ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਛਾਪਾਂਗੇ। Translation: Can a bead that does not have the Bani of Guru Tegh Bahadur be a benchmark? Since the Kartarpuri bead does not have the Sopurkh Paudi, will SGPC now remove the Paudi from the prevalent SGGS? Will SGPC also include in the prevalent SGGS the 7 Faltu compositions that are in the Kartarpuri bead? ਭਾਈ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ, ਅਜਿਹੀ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਉਸ ਬੀੜ ਭਾਵ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰੀ ਬੀੜ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਜੋ ਛਾਪੀ ਨਾ ਜਾ ਸਕੇ। ਭਾਈ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ replied to Pandit Narayan Singh, there is nothing in the Kartarpuri bead that cannot be published. Pandit Kartar Singh had the most valid of arguments against the distorted replacement text that the Kartarpuri bead was, but Jodh Singh, head of the 1951 SGPC committee, saw nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong। ਅਜਿਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਉਸ ਬੀੜ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਜੋ ਛਾਪੀ ਨਾ ਜਾ ਸਕੇ। Once the replacement text, the Kartarpuri bead in this case, had been successfully established as the benchmark for Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the next step, the 6th, was to eliminate challenges to the new benchmark, challenges from academics, from researchers, writers, scholars and thinkers. This is done in a number of ways. The first is to limit access to the Kartarpuri bead. Bhai Khan Singh Nabha, the greatest researchers that the Sikh world has ever produced, was allowed 4 days to look through the Kartarpuri bead. There was tremendous fear, perhaps, that he would see through the charade that this so-called Kartarpuri bead was. Even Bhai Jodh Singh of Chief Khalsa Diwan, the strongest proponent, supporter of the Kartarpuri bead, was not allowed to photograph the pages of the bead beyond certain parts. Only selected people are allowed access. Most requests to view it are turned down. Writers, scholars, thinkers who question the Kartarpuri bead are condemned as heretics, anti-Sikh, anti-SGGS, anti-Gurbani and lots more. Then of course, where necessary, religious hooliganism is deployed to silence those who ask questions about Kartarpuri bead. Bhai Khan Singh Nabha's 1918 letter about the Kartarpuri bead had this dark observation. Sri Guru Granth Sahib ਦੀਆਂ ਬੀੜਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਿਰਣਾ ਗੁਰਗਿਰਾ ਕਸੌਟੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਸਥਾਰ ਨਾਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਪੋਥੀ ਮਸੱਦਾ ਅਤੇ ਬੁਰਸ਼ਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਉਪਦਰਵ ਦੇ ਭੈ ਤੋਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ਿਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੀ। Translation: The evaluation of the beads of Guru Granth Sahib Ji has been done in great detail in my book Guru Gira Kasauti, but the book cannot be published to date in fear of the Masans, meaning head clergy, and their spear-wielding henchmen. Then of course there is the sword of excommunication ever ready to be wielded by the institutions that have become entrenched as the headquarters of the Sikh clergy against those who speak or write against the Kartarpuri bead. For exposing the truth of the Kartarpuri bead, Professor Dr. Pyar Singh, a professor of Punjabi language, literature and culture at Guru Nanak Dev University, was excommunicated in 1993. Gurbani researcher G.B. Singh was supposed to face the same punishment for the same crime. His death beat him to it in 1959. Once all the challenges to the new benchmark or the replacement benchmark, the Kartarpuri bead in this case, have been eliminated, the final step is to establish full and complete control over the spiritual text of Sikhi, namely the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. These are all the 7 steps in a nutshell. First, eliminate the author of the authentic text, Pothi Sahib. Second, create negative narratives about the Pothi Sahib. Third, get rid of the original text and create a distorted replacement text. Fourth, build authenticity and legitimacy for the distorted replacement text. Fifth, establish the replacement text as the benchmark. Sixth, eliminate challenges to the new benchmark. And finally, establish full control over the spiritual text, which is the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. So this is where we are today. The accepted view is that only the SGPC can make the corrections for the errors that have come into the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. Only they have the authority. And the reason only they can do it, according to a vast majority of Sikhs, is acceptability. That the Sikh world will accept the rectifications only if the SGPC and the Akal Takht do it. But in saying such, what we are really saying is that only the clergy can make the corrections. Reason, the SGPC and the Akal Takht, which is under its control, have for all intents and purposes become institutions under the influence of our clergy. If not the epitome of our clergy, the embodiment of our clergy, the essence of our clergy, or the personification of our clergy themselves. And yet we say that only they have the authority to do something to resolve the problem. Why is this the case? Because all the 7 steps relating to the advent of clergyism in Sikhi have come to fruition. All the 7 steps have played out. All the 7 steps have finally borne fruit. The situation today is simply that the Sikh clergy is firmly entrenched within the Sikhi that is practiced by the Sikh world today. We cannot call this the Sikhi of Guru Nanak because he didn't intend Sikhs to become slaves of their clergy. Sikhs are now so completely dependent on our clergy that we look up to our clergy for the resolution of errors in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, a problem that they created in the first place. I call upon every Sikh to ponder and reflect over the issue and the dilemma that Sikhi is in. If not for yourself, then do it at least for the sake of our children. We have been in slumber for too long, so much so, we have allowed our faith to be hijacked. We need to awaken now. Please share these series of videos with your loved ones. They are created for the purposes of bringing about awareness and in the hope of nudging our thinkers, our scholars, researchers, Gurbani experts, change agents, and influencers into organizing themselves under the leadership of any suitable Sikh institutions and into coming together to bring about a suitable remedy to the problem and not keep waiting for our failed institutions to remedy the problem. Thank you for watching.